Continuing debate, the honourable member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Spending last week in and around my riding of Medicine Hat, Carson Warner, two things were abundantly clear. The first, that spring has finally sprung. People are out enjoying outdoor activities, redding their lawns and gardens. Farmers and ranchers are busy seeding and calving. The second thing was that despite the spring bloom, the economic outlook for most people was absolute gloom. And the reason for that gloom, Mr. Speaker, the state of our nation's finances after 9 years of these Liberals and the troubling path of wasteful spending and ever-increasing debt. Let's talk about deficit spending. And that means that it's when this government spends more money than it brings in revenue from Canadian taxpayers. Remember, governments have nothing unless they've taken it from you first.
Exactly.
This government's insatiable appetite for spending means they seek to tax and increase taxes on most everything, even your carbon footprint. And that footprint got 23% more expensive this year, as we know. And the Prime Minister and his radical environment minister are hell-bent on continuing to make it even more expensive. Even with all of these extra taxes, the Liberals still overspend. Under this Prime Minister's leadership, Canada has seen its deficit spending increase significantly. In 2015, our federal debt was $616 billion, accumulated since the country was formed in 1867. Today, it has doubled to $1.2 trillion. That's over $30,000 per Canadian, thanks to this Prime Minister borrowing more than all of Canada's previous Prime Ministers combined. In fact, it will cost Canadian taxpayers $54.1 billion in interest just to service our national debt this year. That interest payment is more than the government spends on the annual provincial health care transfers. It's also about the same amount as the government collects in the GST. And maybe the GST name should be changed to the DST, the debt servicing tax. The alleged intentions behind this spending was to create sunny ways, to grow the middle class, to create fairness for all generations. These are all nice-sounding words, Mr. Speaker. But in reality, when a Prime Minister does not think about monetary policy, nice words quickly get replaced by nasty results. Housing costs have doubled. Interest rates have risen faster than any time in our history. Mortgage payments have doubled. Down payments have doubled. Rents have doubled. The cost of gas, groceries, and home heating have skyrocketed, and people can't afford to eat, heat, or house themselves. This growing debt means that future generations of Canadians will be burdened with higher taxes and higher interest payments. And that is why I, along with most Canadians, shook our heads when the title page of this mess of a budget reads, "Fairness for all generations." There's absolutely nothing fair about the Liberals wasting Canadians' money to buy the support of the NDP as a way of spending their way in their own way to feed their addiction to power. There's nothing fair about running up scandal-ridden bills, changing an election date to secure pensions on your way out, and then leaving that bill for our children and grandchildren to pay. It's not just Conservatives who are critical of this Prime Minister's years of deficit spending. Economists and the banking sector have warned, or the financial sector, have warned the Liberals that their spending is the major contributor to Canada's high inflation. Current Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem cautioned that this excessive spending will make it harder for the bank to lower interest rates. Even former Bank of Canada Governor and Liberal supporter David Dodge says the federal budget hurts the fight against inflation and said Budget 2024 has the potential to be the worst budget since 1982. I wonder who was in charge back then. Oh yeah, it was another Trudeau. Speaking about inflation, more than 40 years ago, American economist and statistician Milton Friedman had this to say, and it holds truth to today. And maybe our Prime Minister and Finance Minister need to listen. Inflation is just like alcoholism, he said. And in both cases, when you start drinking or when you start printing too much money, the good effects come first. The bad effects only come later. That is why in both cases, there is a strong temptation to overdo it, to drink too much or to print too much money. When it comes to the cure, it's the other way around. When you stop drinking or when you stop printing money, the bad effects come first, and the good effects only come later. That is why it's so hard to persist with the cure. Every country that has had the courage to persist in the policy of slowing monetary growth has been able to cure inflation and at the same time achieve a healthy economy, end quote. Besides the inflation problem this Prime Minister and Finance Minister have created in Canada, we also find ourselves confronted by the concerning trend of decreasing productivity. What's more, while this government continues to spend our productivity as a country, which is effectively how we efficiently produce goods and services, is not keeping up. High productivity is key to improving our quality of life, increasing our wages, and maintaining a competitive edge globally. However, Canada's productivity has seen a decline, a sign that we are not maximizing our potential. As Deputy Bank of Canada Governor Carolyn Rogers noted in a recent speech in Halifax, and I quote, "Back in 1984, the Canadian economy was producing 88% of the value generated by the U.S. economy per hour. That's not great, but by 2022, Canadian productivity had fallen to 71%, end quote. Further, a recent Financial Post article observed that over this government's time in office, labor productivity has declined by an average of 0.8% per year. So how can this government then, based on the entirety of the budget, plan on, by recent standards, strong labor productivity growth? In reality, Speaker, it's a fudget budget. Make up the numbers to try and make the budget work. So, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are treating productivity as just a number that they can manipulate to make their budget look slightly less horrible. Productivity is not just a number. It's about how well we can sustain our quality of life. We must confront these challenges head on, and it starts with demanding accountability and prudent financial management from our leaders in government. It starts with treating our proud resource development sectors and all the family-supporting jobs they provide with respect, instead of using them as a scapegoat.
Exactly.
For example, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Germany asked Canada to be a trusted supplier of LNG. Other countries have also made that request. And what's our Prime Minister's response? Oh, sorry, folks, there's no business case for that here in Canada. And look what's happened with that. Our American neighbors stepped up and are reaping the benefits. Their productivity went up 2.6% last year, while the Liberals were happy to see ours decline. Since 2019, the American GDP per capita has grown 7%. Canada's fallen 2.8%. This is the single largest underperformance of the Canadian economy in comparison to the United States since 1965. Stats Canada recently published a report which confirmed that Canadians have gotten poorer under this government. Our GDP per capita is now 7% lower than it should be, meaning Canadians are $4,200 poorer per person. Well, these Liberals, with these Liberals in charge, we should not be surprised by these numbers. We also need to be investing efficiently in areas that genuinely boost productivity, like skills training, technology, and innovation. We need to ensure that spending will bring about real sustainable growth, not just a temporary quick fix. It's about finding a balance between supporting our current needs without compromising the ability of future generations and Canadians to meet theirs. A balance between investing in our country and ensuring we're not reckless and recklessly adding to a mountain of debt that would be impossible to climb down from. Mr. Speaker, the path forward requires courage, leadership, and discipline. By advocating for responsible spending, investing wisely in our future, and boosting our productivity, we can ensure that Canada remains a prosperous, vibrant place for generations to come. The time to act is now. The time to fix the budget is now, to ensure that Canada's financial health, productivity, and the hope of Canadians is not just restored, but allowed to flourish. Conservatives are ready, Mr. Speaker, and able to make that happen. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire, the Honourable Deputy House Leader.
I know that the member has a history in policing and has received numerous awards for his work in policing prior to coming to this House. I'm wondering how, yes, I think that's a great accomplishment, and I applaud him on that too. I'm wondering how he feels about the fact that the Leader of the Opposition associates with Diagolon.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Well, quite honestly, the answer doesn't deserve, or the question doesn't deserve an answer because it's not true. And secondly, I think that to spread the misinformation and disinformation that seems to happen on this side, on the other side a lot, is not helping our dialogue, and it's certainly not answering the questions that Canadians have about what's this government doing with the economy and how are we going to climb out of the hole and the mess that they've created for the rest of Canadians.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire.
The honourable member for Montcalm. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Bloc, since 2019, has always voted against the budget, will continue to do so for this one, notably because in this budget there is no plan to reduce financing of industries that are making incredible profits, unprecedented profits, namely the oil industry. Will my colleague vote against the budget because he is, like us, against funding of oil companies with the people's money? The honourable member for Medicine Hat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can confirm that I will be, and my colleagues, I'm sure, will be voting against this budget unequivocally, but it won't be because of what the member suggests. Anybody in Canada has to do is look at the amount of revenue that the energy sector creates for this country and sustains our growth for infrastructure and spending that we need to do to keep our country going. So, no, the reason he's suggesting is a fallacy. And the truth of the matter is that the energy sector is a major contributor to our GDP, and it's a major contributor to the revenues that our government currently enjoys spending.
Questions and comments? The honourable member Courtney Alberni.
First, I also know that my colleague was an esteemed police officer, and we heard from the BC chiefs of police and chiefs of police across this country when it comes to the toxic drug crisis that they see it as a health issue. They don't want to go back to criminalizing people in my home province, Mr. Speaker. They asked for tools to deal with public use. They cited that diversion is not what's killing people, but it's actually toxic fentanyl. They've called on more safe consumption sites, and we look at Alberta, Mr. Speaker, where we're seeing deaths skyrocketing, 17% increase in toxic overdose deaths, over 5% in British Columbia, Mr. Speaker. So my question is also, Mr. Speaker, we had Petra Schultz from Mom Stop the Harm here in Ottawa yesterday, again asking for a meeting with the leader of the Conservative Party. She lost her son, Danny, Mr. Speaker, 10 years ago today. So through you, Mr. Speaker, will my colleague urge his leader, the only leader in this country that won't meet with Mom Stop the Harm, to meet with the mothers of lost loved ones due to the toxic drug crisis? And does he support the chiefs of police in British Columbia?
Member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
What I do support, Mr. Speaker, is a plan, an effective plan that actually makes a difference for the well-being of Canadians. And it doesn't include the term safe consumption sites. There is no such thing as a safe consumption site. There is no such thing. I spent time in the Lower East Side and Hastings some time ago, and East Hastings, and talked to addicts as they're killing themselves in front of you, and you ask them the questions, and they say that, you know, people don't want us to get us healthy. The system doesn't want us to get healthy. They call the people driving around looking after them poverty pimps. Why? Because they don't care. They say we don't go to consumption sites. They're not what they are taught to be, or thought to be. The reality is this: we have an overdose crisis in this country. 2,511 people died in BC alone last year. Yeah. Unacceptable. Why? Because of drug policies. You know, and so we need a balanced approach. We need treatment. We need addiction services. We need all those things that happen. And wasteful spending on a budget like this government is doing doesn't allow us to spend that kind of money, and we misdirect it in services that they think help, but safe supply is not the answer to this problem. Thank you.